Greg Peterson here, and I want to thank you for listening to the Urban Farm Podcast. We wouldn't be able to keep doing these great shows without you. So as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you access to a list of our top 10 episodes I personally find most inspiring. If you enjoy the Urban Farm Podcast but don't have time to listen to every one, then you will love this list. Although all our guests have great information to offer, if you are short on time, these 10 are must-listens. To get access to the top 10 most inspiring podcast episodes, text FARMER to 44222. That's FARMER to 44222. And enjoy listening.
You're listening to the Urban Farm Podcast, your partner in the Grow Your Own Food revolution. Whether you've just been introduced to urban farming or you're a lifelong advocate, we're sure you'll leave feeling more informed, equipped, and empowered to dig deeper into the soil of your local food economy. With you every step of the way, here's your host, Greg Peterson.
Today on the Urban Farm Podcast, we have Shaun Keesee of BioManna Farms to talk about his experience with biointensive farming. Shaun has an upstart one-acre mini farm called BioManna Farms in Warrenton, North Carolina. On his farm, he grows using a combination of conventional and biointensive techniques, slowly moving toward a completely organic setup, and is growing in all 4 seasons, with the majority of production coming during the typical growing season. He is planning to expand to 3 acres in the future and into other ventures to diversify, such as beekeeping, vermicomposting, and nursery growing. Shaun is in the process of starting a CSA, has taken agricultural entrepreneurship classes at his local community college, and has secured, wait for it, this is epic, 3 local restaurants to buy his produce. Congratulations, by the way. Welcome to the show today, Shaun.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, hey, I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at now?
So I officially named it BioManna Farms this year. And in the past, I've done some growing for more for like the local farmers markets, things like that. And actually, about 3 years ago is when I took interest into doing more organic style growing. And then from there and through all the research, I've decided that I really want to try and pursue an organic, sustainable, pesticide-free growing farm because there's not very many of them around here. So I guess that's what I would say, sort of brought me to the point of where I am now.
So you're kind of on the leading edge of organic farms in your area.
Yeah, because in North Carolina, we're I guess you could say a stereotypical farming state. We grow, grow lots. It used to be tobacco in this area, but mostly it's soybeans and things of that nature, and you don't really see too many people growing produce. We do have a few produce farms, but nothing in the order of organic. Actually, I don't know of one in our entire county. There's a local food movement that has been coming about in our county, and there was a place called Warrenton Food Works that was bringing people's local grown stuff, produce, and meat. So that got me interested initially in trying to do something organic.
Yeah. So, Shaun, why did you name your farm? I'm always curious about that.
I guess it's kind of a funny answer.
Great.
I'll try and keep it short. I named it BioManna Farms, bio being life and manna, spiritual food. So I sort of thought that, to me, sounded like a very marketable name for an organic farm. So that's essentially the reason why I named it that. No special meaning behind it, more for marketing purposes, I guess.
Good.
So that's essentially where the name came from.
Good. So. Cool. So what are you growing on your farm currently?
Currently, although I said that I am growing in all 4 seasons, currently the only thing I have growing is Austrian field peas for cover for the spring. I decided to take a break from growing when I took this agricultural entrepreneurship class.
Mm-hmm.
So I took time to sort of explore the business end a little bit more. So I'm technically not growing any production crops at the moment.
So that's cool. And one of the things that your bio said, and you just said a moment ago, was that you grow through all 4 seasons. So I know, like here in Phoenix, Arizona, that's pretty simple. Actually, the hardest time to grow here in Phoenix is July, August, and September. What kind of weather constraints do you have around growing there in North Carolina?
Just like in Arizona, it gets very hot in those same months. So, but at the same time, our climate, we have a fair amount of rain even in the summer. So you can pretty much grow your typical crops during those months. I guess the constraint would be trying to get an early start on fall and winter crops, because usually you want to start about in August. So there's a little bit of a challenge there in starting seed, because I don't have a greenhouse. I start my seeds inside the house and then I bring them outside. So the constraint there for the fall and winter crops comes in that it's so hot in those months.
Yeah.
But I would say also, winter here, we're in a temperate environment or climate, so it doesn't get super cold here, but it can get down to single digits here a few days. So that pretty much limits what you can grow during the winter. But if you go by the Farmer's Almanac, it'll tell you like broccoli and cauliflower can't be grown below 20 degrees. But I have found that stuff will survive even in the teens for a few nights. And interestingly enough, I had kale and Brussels sprouts that made it through the winter.
Oh, wow.
So, I think I can attribute that, I think, to the actual growing method more than maybe the plant's ability to withstand the cold weather.
Yeah. So that would be biointensive farming when you mentioned the growing technique. So can you tell us about biointensive farming?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I guess, there's, for the most part, I've seen the biointensive techniques are more for small-scale gardening. So what I'm trying to do is find a way to kind of, to scale it up a little bit. With the actual biointensive technique, one of the big things is your plant spacing and also the depth at which you loosen the soil. So for example, with the Brussels sprouts, I planted the Brussels sprouts at about 15 inches apart, and if you go by the Farmer's Almanac, they recommend, I'm not actually sure what the spacing is, but I'm sure it's a lot further apart than that.
Yeah.
And it creates a bit of a microclimate that helps to protect the plants from extreme temperatures. So that's one of the reasons I believe that the Brussels sprouts are able to survive, because the ones that were on the edge of the beds, they had some issues, but the ones that were in the center of the beds seemed to do all right.
Yeah.
So, and if in a conventional row type of farming or something like that, you don't get those sort of advantages of a kind of a small microclimate there. So it's all exposed to the elements.
Yeah. Yeah, I've found that here at the urban farm. We have, like 4 rows of greens growing out in the front yard right now. So there's external forces that come in in the smaller spaces where you might not necessarily have that in larger spaces, right?
Yeah, and we are in the middle of a lot of open land, so we're exposed to the elements. There's no windbreaker, no trees to break any wind or anything like that. So I found that it really has been a big help, particularly in the winter and in the dog days of summer here, particularly with watering. So
cool. So how did you learn about biointensive farming?
I didn't really have anybody to teach me or anything. I read John Jevons' book, I think it's How to Grow More Vegetables was the title.
Yeah, than you ever thought was possible. Yep.
From there, I took interest in it initially just from researching on the internet about how to grow organically and how to grow sustainably. So that's how I would say I got my interest in it, and I sort of taught myself in that, I've done conventional gardening until then, so I sort of took what I knew from that and the general overall, logic behind biointensive growing and just sort of ran with it. And I found that it's actually much easier to manage your growth using the biointensive method, because it seems like you put a lot of your labor up front and then the plants take care of themselves for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the part I love about working with nature, is that if you put all the right pieces in place, then nature steps in. And that's really what you're doing in biointensive farming, right?
Pretty much. I mean, I do companion planting, so that in doing that, you're kind of letting plant diversification kind of help you out a little bit in certain aspects. So yeah, it's definitely kind of letting nature do its thing, because even with companion planting, if you think about if you're walking around in nature, you don't just see one kind of plant around.
Right.
So, I mean, you do to some certain extent, but you have a lot of diversity when you're walking around. So the idea of it seems to make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's why I call it permaculture, and that's why I study permaculture. Permaculture I like to call the art and science of working with nature, and it's about plugging into nature and seeing what nature has to offer. So I completely get that.
The way that we have conventionally thought about growing is to sort of, completely sanitize the growing area of all bugs and all nasty things. And, with the biointensive growing method, you're sort of inviting nature in and letting it help you out.
Yeah. Cool. So how long have you been farming?
Technically, I would say 2 years.
Okay.
And before then, it was more of a hobby.
Yeah.
And I made money at it even as a hobby, because I used to go to the farmers markets around here and sell. But I would say 2 years, because that's when I really kind of considered it as something I would try to pursue.
Yeah.
As a real source of income.
Right. What were you doing for work before you were farming?
I was serving tables.
Yeah. So you were involved with food in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in food, and I was in school and serving tables, so that was pretty much my career at that point.
Well, hey, I delivered in my earlier days. I delivered newspapers. I delivered pizzas. We do what we do back then, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I went to school for biology, so the idea of doing a farm just always sort of appealed to me, particularly, the idea of having having a greenhouse at some point, because that sort of appeals to that sort of side of me.
Yeah.
To experiment and grow things and have things in a controlled environment to, see if I do this particular thing to it, what will happen, and
right.
observe it, sort of thing.
So what happened what happened either in your life or in your mind that you said, you know what, it's time for me to stop serving tables. It's time for me to grow food. What happened?
I decided to move back home from ECU, from Greenville, North Carolina, where I was at school, and we live here on a farm. We have a family farm here, and I just decided, I wanted to get back into growing. So I started doing more and more research as to how I could do it and maybe turn it into a viable business model. My family also has said, we have all this land here that we lease to another farmer just to grow hay, and it would be nice to, utilize it for some other purpose besides growing hay. I mean, the idea of growing hay too, you're having to add a lot of chemicals to the soil.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not sustainable the way that it's grown. Right. So that's pretty much if I were to say what really kind of brought me to it was, coming home and, kind of just having sort of a realization, let's do something with this land that we have leased to other farmers for so long.
Yeah. I have to say that's just beautiful. You're taking a family asset and you're growing it into something.
Yeah, we're starting, as mentioned in the bio, it's 1 acre right now, which, that would be considered, I guess, a micro farm or a mini farm.
Yeah, perfect.
And I want to try and scale it out to the point where it's sustainable and I can do most of the work and maybe have some hired labor as well. But, I'm trying to avoid a high level of mechanization. So we have a tractor here, a small one, but from a lot of the stuff that, with the biointensive method, it's not really discouraged. It's just you don't really need it.
Right.
And a tractor in the growing environment just doesn't. It sounds so weird because we've used them for so long in farming, but it's really not conducive. It's not really a great growing environment.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's not. It's actually not conducive to growing great soil. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what challenges are you facing when converting from conventional to organic farming?
Well, so if I was to sort of think, if I was someone who had no connections trying to get into organic farming, see, my neighbors around here have chicken chicken houses, so I was able to get, chicken manure.
Nice.
So that's something, if you can find a source of manure, I think that's probably a really good, it's a good source of carbon, as well as with chicken manure, you're getting a lot of nitrogen too.
Right.
It may not be available immediately. Its bioavailability is not there immediately. It is, but for the most part, a lot of it's locked up in ammonia and stuff.
Right.
That's definitely a big step, I think, is if you can secure some sort of exterior source of manure or composting material, because with the John Jevons method, you're growing I think it's 60% of what you're growing is just going back into composting and building the soil. And I don't grow all of the different composting crops that he does, so I have to bring inputs in to the farm. So I get a couple of dump truck loads of chicken manure every year, and I get horse manure throughout the season.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do my own composting as well.
Yeah.
So
really,
I guess the big thing is to concentrate on your soil.
Yeah.
That would be my biggest thing. And, you want to get the carbon content higher in your soil initially, because that's usually what soil is, at least in this area where I'm at, which has a high clay content.
Yep.
You've got to add some carbon to the soil.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Getting nutrients into the soil doesn't seem to be quite as hard, because
right.
That a lot of the times if it's fresh land that's never had anything grown on it except for grass,
mm-hmm.
and you have a lot of stuff there already in terms of your nutrients and your all the little iron and all the micronutrients and everything. So yeah, I would say building the soil.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's always our challenge in growing food. Pretty much anywhere you're at is, growing healthy soil and then having access to those materials that you need, which is great for you.
That's definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely say having a manure source is definitely helpful.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Okay. Well, I would say just this recent growing season,
uh-huh.
I had planted a lot of tomatoes, and I knew that I had planted too many tomato plants, even when I put them in the ground. But I went ahead and did it,
mm-hmm.
and my thinking was, well, I can just worry about finding buyers later. And then what happened, all the tomatoes started coming in at one time.
Yep.
And I was like, man, what am I going to do with all these tomatoes? And I remember going out there after I had spent, I don't know how long, out there washing them and placing them and staging them to make them look nice, and going out there and had so many rotten tomatoes out there that I had to throw in the compost. And that really got me, seeing that really pushed me to try and find some buyers very quickly.
Right.
So I secured 3 buyers pretty quickly in my local area, because I have a very unique thing going on here. And when you say organic, especially around here, even though North Carolina is not really thought of as being like, at least this area I wouldn't say is being health conscious, but there's something mysterious about it. So there's one restaurant here that does, I would consider a higher end restaurant. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I told him I had organic heirloom tomatoes, he was like, please bring them here.
Yeah.
So, and there's an allure to local food. So, and also when I think even from the restaurant perspective, if they need something and they can call you up and you can bring it to them, like almost immediately, I mean, they love that too. So
yeah,
I guess the learning experience that I would try and pass on to somebody would be, go ahead and secure buyers even before you have any product ready, particularly if it's something like that they may have some sort of excitement over. So, like heirloom tomatoes, organic or heirloom tomatoes. If I had told him at the very beginning, hey, I'm going to grow organic heirloom tomatoes, he probably would have told me which varieties he wanted me to grow. So,
exactly. Yeah, so I have a farming background here in Phoenix. When I went back to college, at 39 years old. And from the time I was 39 till about the time I was 44, so for about 5 years, My part-time job while I went to college was growing food in my front and backyard that I took to 2 farmers markets and 3 chefs. And I think one of the easiest things to do as a first step for a farmer is, find some local chefs, find out what they want, and then offer to grow it for them, and they will love you. So there's a tip for all you wannabe farmers out there. If you are looking for a method to get your product to market, going into restaurants, finding chefs is a great way to do it. And you've found that, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say in getting started, because it's almost like you have secured a steady stream of income at the very beginning. Even if it's a small amount of income,
yep,
it's steady.
It's income. Yeah.
So, and I have found that they will pay retail prices for what you're selling them if it comes directly from farm to table. So that's another thing too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, absolutely. So what do you consider your biggest success?
My biggest success, I would say, definitely securing those restaurants.
Yeah.
So currently, I'm actually in working with one of those restaurants. They also have a produce processing facility, and I work there on Mondays, and I'm actually trying to get my GAP certification to be able to supply them with certain things. So, but that's going to be more on a wholesale scale. So, I would say those are probably my biggest successes so far with it.
Yeah. So let me just for clarity. I want to make sure I heard you right. You said that you are working at a vegetable processing facility for one of your restaurants.
They have an organization, and the restaurant that they had is part of that organization. And they also have a produce processing facility where they apply local grown vegetables to the school systems around.
Nice.
So
I just want to congratulate you because you've gone into a space and you're learning, and now you're making friends, and now you have another place to sell into. So that's a great piece of work there. Congratulations.
And that wasn't even something I wasn't even looking to try to get into that. That just happened to kind of fall in my lap. So that's
there you go.
It's one of those things. Sometimes you get a freebie.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Well, brilliant, and yay. I mean, when that happens to me, I know I'm on my right path,
Yeah, and I think there's like some sort of quote about, in order to, be lucky, you have to put yourself in an environment to be lucky. If that makes sense.
Oh, no, it makes
I think that was like I think it was a basketball coach that said that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. So what drives you?
Okay. What drives me is I've always had interest in growing, and, I want to try and turn it into a viable business model.
Mm-hmm.
So that drives me. And also the idea of having an organic farm, it's more, there's a lot of fulfillment I get from that.
Yeah.
I'm doing positive things, for my immediate environment around me, as well as for the community. I think if I can get to that point, because there's a lot of interest in organic food, but it's, we don't have a Whole Foods or anything like that around here. So
right.
I'm trying to maybe have my small little niche market in what I'm doing right here. So it's exciting to me that I'm going to be doing something that people have interest in, and there's not anything else like that around here.
Yeah.
So
Nice, nice. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Final piece of advice. I would go out there and try and find buyers before you start growing. That would be my biggest piece of advice to give that I wish I could have done earlier on, because that's the hardest part. You can learn how to grow anything if you are patient enough and you're willing to put the time in, but you can grow the prettiest vegetables, but you got to have somebody to buy them.
Yeah, and I tell people this all the time, that if you want to be a farmer, growing the food's only 50% of the process. The other 50% is picking it, packing it, marketing it, getting it to them, and so be prepared for that. So that fits right into that.
I definitely would. Yeah, because if you don't have buyers, then it's essentially a hobby. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a business. So
a hobby with a nice full tummy. So, well, thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your experience with us today, Shaun. It has been a treat getting to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
I have a Facebook page.
Okay.
It's at www.facebook.com/BioManna Farms.
Okay.
And I also have a website. It is still a work in progress.
Perfect.
I'm the one that's building it, so it's coming along piecewise. It's www.biomannafarms.com. So I would say those two are
Perfect.
the best ways to reach me.
Yeah, perfect. You can also find the show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/BioManna. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Greg Peterson here, and I want to thank you for listening to the Urban Farm Podcast. We wouldn't be able to keep doing these great shows without you. So as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you access to a list of our top 10 episodes I personally find most inspiring. If you enjoy the Urban Farm Podcast but don't have time to listen to every one, then you will love this list. Although all our guests have great information to offer, if you are short on time, these 10 are must-listens. To get access to the top 10 most inspiring podcast episodes, text FARMER to 44222. That's FARMER to 44222. And enjoy listening.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.